folks. You're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the concept and the very idea around examining, particularly as an armchair general, sometimes centuries after the event, but examining military blunders. Now, there's a decent catalogue of military blunders, and they can come in various shapes and sizes. For example, was it an outright blunder by the generals in charge? Did a subordinate commander do something really dumb that created a problem that couldn't be then rectified? Was it interfering politicians? Was it a relative blunder where the other side just happened to be a whole lot better, which didn't necessarily mean that the losing side was hopeless or blundered? It just the other guys were a whole lot better at conducting warfare on the battlefield at the time. Or were there other issues? Did they run out of supplies? Did a bunch of really good soldiers just run out of supplies? Were there disputes in the command structure? So there are a whole lot of things. And if we look at the outcome of military blunders, one of the things with military blunders is their immediacy. There's the battle, and then there's the outcome. Or a short war or the outcome. And blunders can be seen, they become very clear that there was a blunder or a mistake or a misstep of some sort. Unlike, say, a government policy that maybe takes decades to unravel, and where, given the amount of the time span over what is still a blunder, given the time span, the blame can be dispersed and evenly distributed across not only time, but numerous other people and future administrations and so on. But battles are different. You see it pretty much straight away, just shortly after the real time conflict itself. So one of the most cited ones, in fact, you can't pick up a book about military blunders and not have this mentioned, which is the British incursion into Afghanistan in 1841. So now this is where a smallish British army out of India went into what is today Afghanistan, and tried to reorder their arrangements with the tribes. Now, there are various trading routes and all sorts of things going through Afghanistan. The British were already getting nervous about Russian intentions in the region, and so they wanted to just make sure things were stable and secure in Afghanistan. Now, in addition to that, the British had been effectively bribing the Afghani tribes with various, trinkets and gold and whatever else to keep the passes open, because the passes are quite narrow, it's quite mountainous, and keep the passes open so trade could go through, and the British trade and caravans and all sorts of things could pass unmolested, and they kind of paid a tribute to these tribes to not only not molest the British going through, but also to provide protection, say, from tribes further out, Afghani tribes further out that may try and rob them or kill them or whatever. So anyway, that sort of system wasn't working as well as the British wanted, and they wanted to try and reorder it. So they decided to send a small army in there to sort it out. Now, the army was probably big enough to do the job, but there were some various inbuilt contradictions in how the whole exercise was to be run and administered and delivered, and who was in charge of what and so on. And so when we look at blunders, military blunders, we can tend to look at, well, on the battlefield they screwed up, therefore that's a military blunder. But there are in fact a lot of attendant and side issues and feed-in issues, parallel issues that made the situation very difficult to manage. Sure, if all the people involved were of the highest caliber and the highest quality, they probably could have pulled victory out of the jaws of defeat. But for the most part, there's very few people of that high caliber. And once you get a difficult situation with a confused and uncertain brief and low or moderate quality people, then you're looking at potential for disaster just adds layer upon layer. And this is what the situation was here. Now, General Elphinstone was put in charge of it, and he was considered to be an affable, sort of pleasant guy. He had some military understanding, and so he wasn't an utter incompetent. Whether or not you would have put him into a very testing and trying situation, that's quite another matter. But nobody was really anticipating that at the outset. So it was believed it was a mission to go into Afghanistan and negotiate, diplomatically negotiate a new deal with the Afghani tribes. So they didn't want some fire and brimstone general going in there who's going to shoot up the town or blast away at the slightest provocation. They wanted somebody who was going to be more diplomatically disposed than militarily disposed. And Elphinstone certainly fitted that bill. He's also getting on and was not in the best of health. According to the reports at the time, his health was so ordinary that at times he would fall off his horse or be unable to get onto his horse. So here we got an elder man who's considered to be very affable, very pleasant, in poor health, and he's been put in charge of his mission. Now his job was to escort a political agent, a diplomat. It was to escort a diplomat to Afghanistan to negotiate with the tribes to come away with a deal. So the outcome that the British government wanted was, you're going to go in there, you're going to escort this political agent, we're going to negotiate this deal with the Afghani tribes, and there was high hopes of success. There wasn't any view of this is going to be really tough. There was a view that this would be a successful diplomatic mission, and in order just to make sure that the point wasn't lost on the Afghani tribes, that the diplomat had a substantial military escort, and that was again to reinforce the point of don't fuck with us and that sort of stuff, but to be done in a diplomatic way. Now the agent, it wasn't clear who was in charge. Given it was a diplomatic mission, an overall charge, it would appear to be the diplomat, but that the lines weren't clearly drawn here. The diplomat constantly harassed the military, saying, "Well, don't do anything to upset the Afghanis. I want to cut a deal here. That's what we're here for, to cut a deal with these folks. So don't do anything rash. Don't upset them. Don't annoy them. Let me do my job and negotiate the new treaties and so on with them." Now, the Macnaghten, the diplomat, probably wasn't the right guy for the job, and didn't seem to be as sensitive to and aware of the situation as maybe a more experienced diplomat would have been. But he wasn't a total idiot, and again, an exceptional diplomat maybe would have made a difference. But he was standard fare. He wasn't an idiot. He wasn't utterly incompetent. Was he the right guy for the job given the circumstances? Probably not. But so the general in charge of the military, Elphinstone, an affable guy, he wants to get on with the diplomat. His instructions are clear. They're supposed to come back from Afghanistan with negotiated treaties and so on in hand, and that's his job. So he doesn't see his job as to go in there and slap them around or get them into a pitched battle and defeat them. That isn't his job. So nor does he see it that way, nor are his instructions to that effect. So he goes along. I'm just escorting a diplomat in there. Macnaghten, the diplomat, is unsuccessful. Part of the reason is that the British want to reduce the bribes that they're paying the Afghanis. The Afghanis, on the other hand, want even more money. So the British want to reduce those payments, but they want the same guarantees of security and stability and so on. Now, at this point, Macnaghten should have realised that a deal wasn't really possible, and so they would need to do a show of force or to demand certain things rather than beg for them. Remember, the Afghani see this sort of begging. It's to the British, it's negotiation to find middle ground, but to people, the Afghani tribes, it's weakness. Well, you must be really weak if you're coming here begging. So So they started harassing and attacking the British outposts and that sort of thing. Macnaghten's still on Elphinstone's getting in. Don't upset these people. Fire back if they attack you, but don't go out and kill them. That'll only make things worse. Now, Macnaghten read the situation wrong there. But again, Elphinstone sort of goes along with this. And they had various other discussions, like were the British forces going to go into one of the big forts there that could be easily defended against the Afghanis. But parties would still have to go out and collect supplies and get water and, things like that. So if you look at the situation at the time, and again, that they're there to get a diplomatic mission, Elphinstone says, well, we do that. It's kind of provocative. We're occupying a fort. It would suggest that we're scared and that, we're worried about it. Whereas if we just act normally, then it won't be inflammatory or it won't stir up trouble with the Afghanis. So they thought. Now, there are various junior officers that obviously were making suggestions, but remember, Macnaghten is going to Elphinstone and saying, look, don't antagonize these people. I'm close. I've almost got a deal. So, and don't worry about the Afghanis that are coming and killing off a few British soldiers here and there, because they're just outliers. Once we've got the deal in place, then the tribal chieftains will bring these people under control. So there's a lot of toing and froing, very confused. What is our mission? How will we achieve it? What will be the definition of success? Are these people reliable to deal with? Can their word be accepted? Is this the right way to go about dealing with these people? There are a whole lot of things involved. Now, of the 4,500 soldiers, about 700 or so were regular British soldiers, and the rest were local Indian soldiers that really didn't want to be there, and you couldn't rate them as enthusiastic about the project. Now, to make matters worse, the Elphinstone had permitted camp followers and wives and children and all sorts of people to come into Afghanistan and spend time, to be in the British camp. Now, the British camped, quite away from Kabul in a not very defensible position. But again, this was an idea of this. They wanted to project an image of everything's fine. We're not frightened. There's no big deal. We're not expecting a battle. We're not here to shit up the town and kill you all, which was again part of Macnaghten's view. So by the time Macnaghten went for what he thought was going to be the final meeting with the Afghani chieftains, and that they cut him to pieces, literally cut him to pieces. And that by that stage, Elphinstone realised that, without the diplomat there, and it was meant to be a diplomatic mission, that things weren't going to really work out. So now this was at the point when the British should have realised, or Elphinstone should have realised, holy shit, we are in deep shit here. We're going to have to take radical action, and we're going to have to really, fight our way through this. Now, at this stage, he had the option of going into a defensive position and fighting the Afghanis whenever they arrive, and they're using guerrilla hit and run tactics. They're not looking for pitched battles at the moment. So he would have had to take a defensive position and then send out large patrols to inflict as many casualties on them as possible, and to make sure that they realised that any attacks would be dealt with, swiftly and decisively. But instead of that, Elphinstone doesn't want to leave a situation in Afghanistan where diplomatic and negotiated settlements won't be possible later on. He takes the view that if he goes out aggressively, seeking battle and killing as many Afghans as he can, then they won't be able to negotiate a settlement at all, and that the whole thing will go up in flames. So he's quite sensitive to the diplomatic nature of the mission. So he makes the faithful decision. Now, bear in mind, they've got something like 12,000 camp followers, women and children and hangers-on and cooks and all sorts of people. And then they're going to leave Kabul, or they're around Kabul, Afghanistan, and they're going to go back into North India. And it's something like I think it's even if you're marching quickly, it's still like 6 or 7 days or something like that of quite swift marching to get there. But they've got all these camp followers, the baggage, the whole thing. It's it's a fiasco in the making. And Elphinstone, his health deteriorating even further, is in charge. Now he should have at this point worked out, hey, I'm not up to this. I've got to give I've got to hand command over to one of the more aggressive colonels or other sort of junior generals or whatever that are there. But instead of that, he makes the fateful mistake, and this is a big mistake, of hanging on. So he's still going to, but he won't make a decision, but he won't let others make a decision. And he's terrified that any decision he makes may be held against him later by the folks. He's a personal friend of the English king, for Christ's sake. So he doesn't want to be in a situation where he brings embarrassment to the aristocracy and to the monarch, and also to his family. So he's a man torn between so many different emotional considerations, and yet he's in charge of this desperate situation. So they decide to go back with all these camp followers, and of course the Afghani tribes ruthlessly harass them in guerrilla tactics. There's a cavalry contingent, but not enough to cover the whole sprawl. Remember, there's like 16,000 of them at the beginning. The whole sprawled out thing. So eventually, they're all killed off, other than the few people that have managed to get through to the other end. I think there's only a handful make it through. So was it a military blunder? Was there a pitched battle that the British forces in Afghanistan were roundly defeated or something? No, it was nothing like that. It was just an indecisive, man in poor health who was put in a very difficult situation to begin with. And then when the political agent, the diplomat, was cut to pieces, quite treacherously, by the way, was cut to pieces, then Elphinstone had to pick up the pieces from that, or to try and put together the try and get the British forces and all their camp followers out of Afghanistan, or he had to stay and fight. He decided staying and fighting would cause too much casualties on the Afghanis, which would then limit the ability of the British to come back and negotiate something down the track. But he had no idea that his whole contingent would be massacred on the 11 or 12 days or so it took to get to the other end. Now the British did later on send an army to avenge that defeat, but that was some years later. But that was so Elphinstone's taken the blame for this. He was a useless general. He should have done this. He should have done that. And it's easy with hindsight as an armchair general to say, well, if you'd only done such and such, would have been fine. Now I'm sure he could have rescued most of the people, and most of the people would have got out, or he could have stayed in a well defensible fort position and forced the Afghanis to come to him, and he could have inflicted heavy casualties on them once they showed their faces. But it probably would have been at least 12 months before the British could have sent a relief expeditionary force, and alerted to the situation, they would have I suspect sent a pretty high caliber general out, and inflicted some serious and crushing defeats on the Afghanis. But that he would have still had to wait 12 months, 18 months before that could be put together. So Elphinstone made a decision to retreat, a disastrous decision. Militarily, his position was impossible given the amount of camp followers, and he had to spread his soldiers out over quite a distance. Again, 3/4 plus of his army was Indians who just didn't want to be there and who were unenthusiastic about the whole project. So really the reliable soldiers would have been less than 1,000 soldiers to protect 12,000 plus camp followers and to repel all the attacks and the constant attacks from all sides, ambushes, the whole thing by the Afghanis. Then it was always going to be a disaster. I don't agree it was a military disaster. I think the only bad decision Elphinstone made was to retreat back to India when he did. And aside from that, I think his deference to the diplomatic nature of the role and to his Macnaghten, being in his face to not antagonise, irritate, upset, or otherwise compromise the possibility of a diplomatic negotiated outcome. I think that was where the problems began, and once those problems were in train, it was impossible for anyone really, other than the most capable generals, to have dug their way out of that. And of course, Elphinstone couldn't have foreseen in advance that the Afghanis would decide to not only turn upon Macnaghten, but actually to physically cut him into small slices. Whilst inviting him to a meeting and turning on him quite treacherously. So Elphinstone couldn't have known those things. So was it a good idea to let all those camp followers come from India, such as the wives and children of the officers and so on? Of course not. That was ridiculous. But again, Elphinstone takes the view, Macnaghten's assuring him, no, we're going to negotiate everything. Everything's fine. We'll negotiate a settlement here. It's all good. So Elphinstone, based on the advice of Macnaghten, who in many ways is in charge of this expedition, Elphinstone accepts that, okay, well, everything's fine. We might as well bring the women and children over. So there's a lot to it than that. But was Elphinstone the most competent? Was he the right general for that situation? No, he wasn't. He was an elderly gentleman in poor health. But was he the idiot? And was this entire blunder down to him? No, it wasn't. There are other factors involved. You've been with Tassless today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.